Real food doesn't have to be expensive or extravagant. In today's video, I'm walking you through 8 easy homemade foods I made this Easter weekend that saved us money without compromising on nourishment. These are perfect if you're feeding a family or just want to stop buying the same overpriced snacks and staples every single week. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. So a lot of these recipes you will notice are wheat-based, and that's because when you're cooking for a lot of people, flour, salt, water, yeast tend to go a far way for a little bit of money, and that's how we can afford to host a large group of people, is by making a lot of cheap dishes out of things like flour, salt, and yeast. So this first recipe is focaccia. I'm not sure if I am pronouncing that right or not, but this is actually the first time I'm making this, and this is the only dish in this video that I didn't make for the dinner that we are having tonight. It's not really a dinner, but it was more of a snack and munchies because we were doing a game night, and then we were having Easter dinner the next day, and my mom was hosting that, so I wanted to make something to bring, and that's what I was doing today. And when you make focaccia, it turns out the best when you let it sit overnight in the fridge. So for this, all I'm adding is 4 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 teaspoons of yeast, 2 cups of warm water. Then I mix it with the spoon and try to get as much off the bowl as I can, and eventually with any dough I transfer to my hands and use that to combine it all. And then once I was done mixing it with my hands, I just coat the bowl with oil. Focaccia has a lot of oil, and this also just helps prevent it stick to the bowl as well because it is sitting overnight, and then it also prevents it becoming dry. So you also want to kind of roll the dough ball in it, because since it's sitting so long, if you don't do this, and you also want to wet the bowl cover, because again, if you don't do this, it will dry out the top and you kind of get like a crunchy layer. So you want to add as much oil as your heart desires and wet your cover, put it on, and then let it sit in the fridge for anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. And as always, any recipe that is not mine, I'll link it down below, and all the recipes that are mine in this video, I'll write them out so you have all the recipes you will need to do if you want to follow any of these. So next, I was just rinsing out some of these beans I had soaking overnight. I had chickpeas soaking along as black beans because I knew that I wanted to make both hummus and as well as black bean brownies because Kai requested those. I think those are his favorite thing that I make, and I don't blame him. They are really good. This whole plate that I made that you'll see later literally went. So once they were rinsed off, I just added them into their own pot and then boiled them until they were soft enough to stab with a fork. And while they were boiling, I moved on to my next recipe, which was my homemade crackers. I've been making these for a couple weeks now, and ever since I started making these, I just don't know how I ever bought store-bought. They are really simple. Like, they kind of seem intimidating to make, but honestly, the longest part of it is just rolling it out and cutting it up. But it really doesn't take that long, and it's not that hard. It only has a couple ingredients, and they taste way better, and there's no weird ingredients in it or like preservatives. It's literally just flour, salt, water, and oil. I always start off by measuring the dry ingredients, and I usually double this recipe because I find they last a while if you store them in an airtight mason jar. They don't go dry. And with everyone who came tonight, we had a total of 8 people, so really the more the merrier. I'd rather have extras and have leftovers for the week than not have enough. So like I said, I added the 4 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of salt, then I added 1.3 cups of water and 2/3 cups of olive oil, and then I mixed it all together. And then usually what I do once it's all mixed, I'll separate it into however many portions I want. Today I did 3, and then add separate flavors into each. So for one, I did rosemary, another one I did black pepper, a little more salt and olive oil, and then another one I did garlic. And this is just the fun thing about making everything from scratch, where you're like homemade things like crackers, is you can really play around with it and do whatever flavoring your little heart desires. I would say I think my favorite, it's really hard to say, but I think it would be garlic because I am a garlic girly. I love garlic in everything, but honestly the rosemary and black pepper were amazing too, and they were all a hit. But some other flavor mixture suggestions could be garlic and thyme together, or if you have like everything bagel season, that's another great one I love. So after I was done mixing all the flavors together, this is when I preheated the oven to 400, and then I rolled them out all on their own baking sheet. Sorry if you can hear the meowing in the background. We just got a kitten for Makai. Come here, kitty kitty. And it just wants attention because it's a kitten. Come on. Anyway, what I was saying, after this, I just roll it out on a baking sheet, and I like to play around with it. I make some thinner and some thicker because I know different people, they have different preferences. I honestly like both. I would have to say, if I had to choose though, I like the thin and crispy ones, but Kai actually likes the more fluffy and thicker crackers. Oh, and I just wanted to mention, thank you everyone who commented different ways on sharpening your knife. If you can see here, was sharpening it on the back of a ceramic mug, and I do find it works. I mean, I think these knives just might be very low quality because even though it does make it sharper, they still are relatively dull. But thank you for all your help and input and saving me from spending money on a knife sharpener when I can just do it at home with things I already have. So if you're watching this and you commented it, thank you. And if you didn't comment that, maybe now you learned a new thing from our little community of people who like to help each other on saving money. So the thinner you roll it out, the more crispy it would be, but you can do what I do and do a little bit of both. And especially because I wanted to cook them all at the same time to save energy in the oven. However, we only have one actual baking sheet, and then the other sheets you can see that I use is a pizza sheet and then like a dish. I don't really know what to call it. So they weren't as big as the big baking sheet, so therefore I just had less room to roll it out anyway. You can just roll it out as thin or as thick as you want and cut them up and then put them into the oven from anywhere to 10 to 20 minutes. You'll just want to keep an eye on it, and this really has to do with how thick you made the crackers and as like how many sheets you put into the oven, because I know I don't have a convection oven, so when I put more than one sheet it takes a little longer. So for mine it took roughly 20 minutes to cook them all, but if you rolled yours out very thin and you only had the one baking sheet in the oven, it could take, only 10 minutes to cook. Once I had my crackers in the oven, it was perfect timing because my black beans were done cooking, so I moved on to my black bean brownies. These are always a crowd favorite. Everyone loves them, and nobody can tell that they're actually healthy and good for you. Even kids. My nephew hates any healthy things and he loves these. So for this you'll need black beans, hence the name black bean brownies, cocoa powder or cacao powder, oat flour or just oats. Hack, you can make your own oat flour for pennies. Don't buy oat flour. It's a ripoff. It's way overpriced. All you need is a blender, but for this recipe you need a blender anyway. Then a dash of salt, some maple syrup or sweetener of your choice like honey or coconut sugar, some coconut oil or any other oil of your choice, but I like the flavor of coconut oil in this, and then a teaspoon of baking powder, and optional to add chocolate chips or cacao nibs, whatever you have. But essentially you're going to add everything into the blender except for the chocolate chips. So I add 4 cups of black beans, of cooked black beans. That's very important. Make sure they're cooked and nice and soft. 1/4 cup of cocoa powder, 1 cup of oat flour, and if you don't have oat flour, I would just add roughly 1 to 1.5 cups of rolled oats and blend that first before adding the rest of the ingredients. Then add a dash of salt. I add 1/2 cup of maple syrup for my sweetener of choice because I live in Canada and maple syrup is the elite sweetener in my opinion. It's full of healthy minerals. It's great for you and it tastes great. 1/2 cup of coconut oil, like I said, a teaspoon of baking powder, and blended that all up on high speed for roughly, I would say 2 to 3 minutes until it became the smooth texture. And then I added in my chocolate chips before greasing a pan with coconut oil, adding it in there and smoothing it all out before popping it in the oven at 350. And I baked it around 18 minutes, give or take, really, again, depending on your oven. Some ovens cook quicker, some slower, and it also depends on the texture, but I think 18 minutes is perfect for the fudgy consistency. It's not too dry yet, it's still cooked and not too gooey, just the perfect amount of gooiness. On to the next recipe. I am showing yet another hummus recipe. I know I have shared a hummus recipe on here multiple times, but I can't help it. This is just something that I make all the time and almost for every gathering. It's very cheap and cost effective to make for others. It's delicious and it's something we eat a lot, so if it doesn't go, then we have it for the week. And that's why I made a double batch, is because I want it extra for the rest of the week, and I wanted to make 2 flavors as well. Because I make hummus so often, I don't really measure things. I more eyeball it, especially when it comes to the chickpeas, but I would say I added probably roughly 3 cups of cooked chickpeas in the blender, and then I cut up some garlic here. You can add more or less depending if you like the flavor of garlic. And then a hack is to add the lemon or lime juice, whatever citrus you're using, with the garlic, because it helps extract the flavor and make it more garlicky. I use limes because my mom had a huge bag that she wasn't using and she gave to us, but I find limes here that you buy at the grocery store, they typically don't have a lot of juice in them. They're pretty dry. That's why we usually don't buy them. So I had to top it off with some lime extract just to have enough. I like my hummus to be on the more citrus side, so that's why I added a little bit extra. And then I added roughly half a cup of tahini in there, roughly 1/4 cup of olive oil, and then I also added a little bit of paprika. And I eyeball the water, and the amount of water you're gonna add just depends on the thickness you want it. So I recommend adding a little bit, maybe 2 tablespoons to 1/4 of a cup, then blending. And then if you want it creamier, add more. And also, if you want, you can add ice cubes or even frozen ice cubes of the aquafaba water, and doing this makes it even creamier. And if you don't have ice cubes, just make sure you're adding cold water. And then for the second flavor, I know I'm past this video part, but I wanted like a simple dill pickle flavor, so I just added this herb and dill spice I had, along with just a splash of vinegar to give it that dill pickle flavor, blended it, and then put it in the next bowl. So now I am prepping my ingredients for the pizza. I just kept it simple and wanted to use what we had. So for the pizza, I added cheese on top, and then as well as red onions and olives, because, well, like I said, that's just what we had, and I know that the people who were coming like those things. And then it was time to prep the dough. I was timesing this recipe by 3 because I wasn't sure how hungry everyone would be. So I made 1 pizza ready for when they came, as well as 1 thing of garlic fingers, and then I had an extra dough for an extra pizza or garlic fingers in case anyone wanted more. But on this day, I didn't need to make extra, so just froze the extra dough for another day, which I usually do when I make pizza anyway. I always double the recipe and then freeze one for days that I don't feel like making anything from scratch, or just having a quick dinner, because then you just have to let it de-thaw and then put toppings on it, and it's an easy dinner. For the dough, I usually use my mom's recipe that she got from her mom, but today I wanted to try something new. This recipe on Google has 5 stars and almost 3,000 people have used it, so you know it's going to be a good recipe. The recipe calls for 2 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of yeast, 1.5 teaspoons of sugar, a little bit of salt if you want some garlic powder, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and 3/4 cups of warm water. So what I did, the recipe didn't call for this, but because I didn't have instant yeast, I mixed the water and the yeast together and then let it sit for 5 minutes, and this just helps activate it. And then I added the rest of the ingredients, and like I said, I made 3 times the amount. So if you want to make more, just double or triple the recipe. And if you want these cute bowl covers that I put on top of my pizza dough, I'll link the tutorial down below that I made with my mom. Right here, I was just putting the crackers in mason jars to help prevent them from going stale. And then I was just prepping some garlic for the garlic fingers. I was just chopping it up into tiny pieces. Then I put it in this mason jar with some olive oil just to let it seep for a little bit and have more of a garlicky flavor. I could have cooked it on the stove and infused it that way, but honestly, I just kind of was lazy and didn't want to do that. And then I ended up also adding garlic powder to it just to give it an extra garlic flavor, and then top the garlic fingers with cheese. It was so good. I didn't end up using all this garlic on the garlic fingers, but I use garlic almost every single day, so I knew that, you know, chopping up the extra, it'll just be in the fridge ready for the rest of the week for the recipes. And then for the next thing I made, this has been one of my go-to favorites to make for Kai's lunches because it's so easy and so cheap, pretty much pennies to make. So all I did was add roughly a tablespoon of butter, but you could use any oil or fat of your choice, and then added some popcorn seeds. Once it was heated up, the oil, shook it around and let it do its thing for about, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, and then it was done. It's literally so easy. And then I topped this one off with a little bit of sea salt, nutritional yeast, and pepper. And a great thing about popcorn is that you can make it so versatile. You can make it sweet, you know, add some sugar on top, or you can make it spicy. My sister, what she actually does is add dill pickle juice on it. And so it's just a great cheap thing that you can spice up in so many ways. And it's a great party food or when you have people over because, again, it's so cheap and it takes almost no effort to make. So what I'm doing right here now is just making the pizza sauce for our pizza. I never really follow a recipe for this. I just do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So I added 1 can of tomato paste along with some water to make it thinner. Added some sugar, and then for my seasoning, if you can see here, I added this pizza spice that Kai made called Dada's Pizza Spice, along with some garlic powder and onion powder and a little bit of salt and pepper. Stirred it all up and it was good to go. Now it was time to assemble the pizza. It was still like over an hour before everyone came, but I just wanted to have everything ready in advance, so I assembled it and then just let it sit in the oven. Just coated my pan with flour to prevent it from sticking, rolled out the dough. I personally like thinner pizzas, so I made it on the thinner side, topped it with the pizza sauce, then the cheese and the toppings, and like I said, stored it in the oven until it was time to cook. Then I started working on assembling the garlic fingers. In my opinion, garlic fingers need more olive oil than pizza. That's kind of just an essential part of garlic fingers. So instead of coating this pan with flour, I coated it with olive oil, and I made these a little bit thicker. Just again, personal opinion, I like my garlic fingers more thicker than I like my pizza dough crust, and also this was the only other pan I have, so it kind of just had to be thicker because the other one's bigger, so I can spread it out thinner. And then I topped it with more olive oil and the olive oil garlic mixture, and then I added even more garlic powder on top just because I'm a garlic girly. I said this before, and I just like all the extra garlic flavor I can have. So it's important to me that my garlic fingers are extra garlicky, or else I do not like them. And then I decided just to top it with a little bit of cheese as well, and then put that in the oven as well to just sit until everyone came and cooked it. And then here I just decided to store my popcorn in a mason jar. Keep the bugs out because we have lady beetles, so it's important that everything's kind of stored with a lid on right now. So we have now time traveled into the future. It is the next day. It is a couple hours before Easter dinner, and I just took my dough out for the focaccia to let it rise the second time. So I just greased a pan with lots and lots of olive oil because with focaccia you can never be too cautious with the amount of olive oil you use. And then I just formed my dough into a ball, kind of got some of the air bubbles out, and then just put it into the pan and let it rise for 3 to 4 hours. It is colder where we live, so what I did was I just preheated the oven slightly and then put it in there just to kind of speed up the process so it would be ready in time. And then this is what it looked like. It should fill up the whole pan. And then I had this rosemary olive oil I had all the way back from a video I did when I made the vegan shepherd pie and homemade bread. So I topped it with that just to use it up. And then this is called dimpling. You just use your fingers and punch little holes into it basically. And this is how it turned out. It turned out so good, better than I could ever imagine. So I definitely recommend using this recipe that I'll link down below. I didn't get any shots of it because we were in a rush because it was dinner time and then we had to go over to my brother's house. But trust me, it was so fluffy and delicious on the inside. And for this last recipe I am showing you guys, I decided to make fruit leathers, also known as like fruit roll-ups, for my nephews and nieces for an Easter treat. I have bags and bags of frozen rhubarb from last garden season in my sister's freezer that I need to use up, so I decided to use one bag for this. All I did, since it was frozen, and rhubarb is a lot more like stringier and stronger fruit and bitter, but when you cook it, I find, well, it makes it a better consistency for blending, and then it also makes it sweeter because you break down some of the sugars. So I just cooked it for probably 20 minutes because at first it needed to de-thaw, and then I just boiled it for a minute or two and then turned it down until it got to this consistency. You can see here it's a lot thinner. Then I let it cool off and I decided to add the juice of one orange because we had an orange on hand from Kai. He got it from work, and I find just adding citrus to anything like this helps bring out the flavor, and I personally think the flavor of orange and rhubarb go well together. And because rhubarb is a bitter fruit more than others, I decided to add a big tablespoon of this local honey that we have, but I again added it later when it cooled off because honey has so many benefits, but when you add it to something hot, it loses a lot of its benefits. So I just mixed that all on up, and then I'm so excited to show you guys that I got this new dehydrator from London Sunshine. This is my first time testing it out and I think it is great. I used a dehydrator last year to dehydrate some of my herbs, but it was my dad's and it's like a decade old and it honestly didn't really work. And I've been wanting to get one for a while now for this upcoming season because I also hung and like air dried a lot of my herbs, but I did it in my mom's covered deck area because it was supposed to be sealed, but it rained so hard one day that they all got wet and ruined it, and I had to sadly put them all in the compost. So this I plan to use a lot this summer to dehydrate my herbs. And another great thing about this dehydrator, it has a tray for fruit leather, and I actually did make a lot of fruit leather last year, but I used the stove because the dehydrator my dad had didn't have this tray, and this is a lot more energy efficient doing it in this little dehydrator rather than having the stove on for 10 hours. So if you're interested in it, I'll make sure to link the product down below, and you can use Jill10 to get a discount off of the product. And guys, these turned out so good. When I made these in the past in the oven, I found that the middle was more gooey than the outside, like it didn't really evenly dry. These, I don't know why it spread out a bit when it was drying, but it definitely turned out way better than it did when I did it in the oven, and the kids loved these. They had a perfect sweet and tart taste to them, and the consistency turned out perfect. I actually have another batch going right now as we speak. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and watching it. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.